Hey y'all, thanks for tuning into another video. And so this one is about when we place our perspective and identity in the hands of others. And I was actually listening to a sermon by Pastor Jerry Flowers. Shout out to him. He's one of my faves. And he was talking about scissors. And so he said, what is the object that's in my hand? And the congregation was like, those are scissors. And he was like, okay, what do they do? And people were saying things like they cut fabric or they cut hair or they, can cut vegetables and herbs and all these different things. And so what he said after it blew my mind because he said it depends on whose hand they're in and the perspective of the person that's looking at them, right? So if they're in the hand of a barber, then they're going to cut hair. If they're in the hand of a seamstress, then they're going to cut fabric. If they're in a hand of a chef, then they're going to cut the herbs. And so he related it to, if you are being utilized by God to do his purpose for your life, then your life is in his hands. So your utility and your usefulness and what you're here for comes from him. And your perspective of yourself is a result of what you know to be true about yourself, like what gifts he put into you for you to operate in this world. But if how you see yourself and think of yourself comes from the perspective of the outside world, their perspective is very limiting based on who they are, what they think of themselves, what they think of, God and his plight in the world. And so if you are placed in their life, i.e., their hands, then who you are and what you can do and what you can achieve is limited based on their perspective of you. But if you're placed in the life in the hands of somebody who sees you just like God sees you, then your ability to go into that life and do and achieve the things that God put you here for is far easier. And so, what happens when how we see us and who we think we are, the perspective that we have of ourselves and the identity that we are living in, is shaped by other people? Well, I can tell you that what happens is you don't live a full life. As I said in my podcast earlier this week, what happens between those two dates on your tombstone can just be a dash. You don't get to control the length of time, but you can control the fullness of that time. And so, what happens during that time period is heavily shaped by the way that you see yourself and the way that you identify when you're walking in this world. And so, if you're allowing other people to create that perspective and identity for you, you're limiting your abilities based on those people. And so, what can you do when you know that that's happening to you, when you haven't really truly sat in prayer and asked God why He has you here, when you've only ever just considered what other people have to say about you? Well, the first thing you have to do is consider the source. So, when you're going through something in your life, if you're going to a person who's never experienced that thing and who isn't directly in prayer and connected to God, then you're probably considering the wrong person's perspective of the situation and you. Oftentimes when I was going through situations, when I was dealing with, single parenthood and how to co parent, I didn't have very many people around me to go to because though my parents are divorced, they didn't divorce until we were grown. And so that co parenting and switching weekends and having to do drop offs and pickups and child support and all of those things weren't a part of their story. My sister married her high school sweetheart, and though I love that for her because we love him so very much, she still didn't have the same perspective to be able to tell me. She could tell me themes of things, right? But she couldn't tell me the nitty gritty of how to operate in that space. And conversely, I have people in my life who are dealing with very similar situations as the one that I was dealing with not so long ago. And when they come to me and they ask me for my advice, I have wisdom to give them because I've experienced that same thing. So when you're thinking about how people are perceiving you and what they have to say about you and who they think you are, you have to consider the source. Who's saying what they're saying? And if it's not coming from God and it doesn't align with who he says you are, and you haven't sat with him long enough to even determine what that is, then you first need to do that and then consider if the person's perspective of you and who they're saying you are doesn't line up with who he says you are, then it's not true. So if you're operating in that space today where you just don't quite know if what other people say about you is true and if that's actually who you are. Just remember that if it doesn't align with what God says, then it's not true. When I was going through the throes of, getting out of a really terrible and toxic relationship, one of the things that he did was try to a smear campaign, and he called almost every person that he could get in contact with that he knew that I knew, even going to the extent of creating a fake Instagram page to try to change people's perspective of me because he wanted them to know who he thought I was. And I had to ask myself on several occasions, is that the kind of mom that you actually are? Is that the kind of person that you are today? Because there were mistakes that I made in my past that he was like telling the world about. And though I wasn't hiding those mistakes, I know that that's not who I am today. And so I had to really consider the source. What's his motive for saying and doing the things he's doing? And is that really what God says about you? And at the end of the day, none of that was true. And the second thing is, don't let them call you what makes you useful to them. So if you think about what people expect from you, the perspective that they have of you and the identity that they try to get you to walk in, a lot of times you can discern by asking yourself, what does who they perceive me to be and the identity that they want me to walk in, what does that do for them? And so if you are weak and you are weak minded and you are a bad mom and you are all these things that they're saying about you, if all of those things were to be true, what would that do for them? And oftentimes, what you'll find is that the identity that they've created for you and the perspective at which they look at you and they want you to look at yourself makes something easier for them, or it positions you in a place of utility for them. So if he could have gotten me to believe all of the things that he was saying about me, then I would have believed that I wasn't good enough to find someone who would make me happy and find someone who would give me joy. And I would have believed that I'm supposed to be alone for the rest of my life. If I thought that I wasn't a good mom, then I would listen to his manipulation for how our child should be parented. So it gave him a place of power for me to believe the things that he was saying about me. So when you're in that space, I want you to question, what is that perspective that they're trying to get me to see and the identity that they're trying to get me to walk in? What is it doing for them? And if you can answer it and you understand that it's probably giving them power and control or creating admiration for them or a heightened sense of what they're doing in your life, accountability for you creates gratitude for them, then you shouldn't be considering that person's perspective or walking in the identity that they've shaped for you. And the last thing is, you have to get down into the depths of who you are and question why you believe it in the first place. If you're letting somebody shape who you think you are, if you're letting somebody create the identity of you as an external person from them, they're getting to create who you're walking in the world as, you have to ask yourself why you're allowing that to happen. And I would almost guarantee you that the first thing that we talked about in the beginning of this video is the reason. You haven't consulted God and asked him, who am I and how am I supposed to walk into this world? You're insecure and you're letting those core beliefs and wounds that you've always dealt with continue to perpetuate this narrative in your life. So if you're in that space today, I would encourage you to really think about who you are, who you want to walk in this world as, and really think about why other people are trying to shape or change who you know yourself to be and what you know to be true about you. And if this video encouraged you, I would hope that you would click that share button, share with other people, because my goal for life is to share my testimony so that other people can break free from the bondage that I experienced for decades in my life so that you don't have to experience it for that many years. So like and subscribe to my pages, go on my social media. If you want to send me a DM to help you get out of the space that you're in, I would gladly speak with you, and make sure that this video gets to anyone who is living in that bondage. Thank you for tuning in, and I appreciate all of you, and I'll see you again next time.